The concept for Star Warrior started back in 2007. I had run out of science fiction films to watch. I therefore decided, for entertainment reasons only, just to write a science fiction film. Having written the story, I thought that would be great to see in film format. I therefore decided to go to university and study a master's degree in video production. And about 2 years after that, my stepfather said that I could use his factory to make a film if I wanted to. About 5 years after that, Tony decided to sell the factory, and I was therefore left with a decision. Either forget about the film altogether and just move on with my life, or produce and direct a film within 3 months.
Well, I got involved with Star Wars because Mark is my stepson, and he asked could he do the filming in the factory and in various offices we have here. So it was a bit of a challenge, but we managed, and in this office I'm speaking from now, we managed to erect a 6 metre wide green screen from the ceiling to the floor and right across.
So the next step was to find actors to take part in the film. I could not afford to have actors come up from London because I couldn't afford to put them up in a hotel for the duration of the film. So I had to use local actors, which I had no problem doing, except for the fact that they would all obviously have a northeastern or Geordie accent. So all the actors were briefed beforehand to, when they come for audition, to hide their accent. Now some preferred to do this by putting on a posh or neutral English accent.
I find myself in here with a detonator attached to my heart.
Whereas others preferred to do this by putting on a fake American accent.
I will find them. Not putting an end to this once and for all.
The actor's CV that I remember reading the most was that of Gary Manson. I noticed on his CV that he did face painting, as he'd been involved with theatre and all kinds of jobs. So I had a feeling that he would become important to the film in a number of ways. My instincts were dead on. Because it was interesting that during the audition, it kind of quickly turned into me and him sat around his computer as I in detail described every character's look and sketched it down while Gary was on the computer looking at individual components that we could use to build these characters, horns and prosthetics and things like that.
So I first got involved with Star Warrior through social media. I'd seen a post about a production for a sci-fi film, and I was like, ooh, that sounds interesting. So I went along and got talking to Mark Dowie, the director, the producer, a number of other things. We got talking, and he noticed that I had a few more talents rather than just acting, so he decided to utilise them to the best of the ability for the film. And I ended up becoming the makeup artist.
So with the green screen studio, the makeup officially underway, the next thing I had to do was create costumes and props for all of these characters. So after several meetings with Gary Manson, it became obvious that he would require a makeup artist to help him apply all of the makeup and prosthetics during principal photography. This was a problem because although I'd had lots of actors come forward to take part in the film, I'd had absolutely nobody come forward to be part of the crew. So this presented a conundrum. Where do I get Gary, an assistant makeup artist, from?
I got involved doing the makeup for Star Warrior through my son Mark Dowie, who's the director, writer and producer of Star Warrior itself. He introduced me to Gary Manson, who trained me. I was his assistant, his personal assistant, and he guided me through the whole experience.
My most favourite character that I played was Chineshwa. He's the bad guy. I modelled him on Mark. Shh, don't tell him. Yeah. He's just evil personified. I had a lot of fun playing him because It was like a pantomime villain brought to life. He was a clone, he was head of an empire. He was just a badass.
Jirova is a very interesting, complex character, but essentially he's wise, he's strong, he's not arrogant, he cares for the universe, he's prepared to do what is necessary for that purpose.
The casting of General Ragtooth was a particular problem. This was because, due to Ragtooth's rather large and boisterous and gregarious nature, I needed an actor with a certain gravitas who could pull that off, particularly in the voice. And the only actor I had so far that I felt had that voice and that persona was Eddie McNamee. The problem was Eddie McNamee was waiting for a hip operation at the time, so there's no way I could have cast him as General Ragtooth. He just would not have been able to do all of the physical work that is required of that particular character. So it was really to my much delight when I opened the front door and heard David Wayne speak his first words to me. I think it was something like, "Hi, I'm David Wayne." I literally thought to myself, there's General Ragtooth.
My character, General Ragtooth. Well, at one time he was the Commander-in-Chief of the Sabre Armed Forces. How? Don't ask me, because I don't think he's very bright. However, that's what he was. He is not articulate, he is loud, he is brash, he is commanding, and he is capable of making instant decisions. These are tactical decisions which have proved to be critical turning points in the story. So although he's not articulate, he's not capable of holding his own in a debate among intellectuals, he is capable of turning the whole story on its head by doing something instantly. The character I wanted to play most was Jirova. I am Jirova. I am an Infinite, the last of my kind. And this was for entirely selfish reasons, really, because Jirova is the oldest character. He is millennia old. And he doesn't move around a great deal. I was 67 years old, in fact I was nearer 68 at the time, and overweight, so I wasn't really that interested in doing one of the frantic action parts. So I thought, if I can be a sage, dignified, old, all-seeing type mage, that would suit me down to the ground. Didn't work out that way though.
Looking back, the audition with David was really quite funny because he was constantly pushing to do more Jirova, and I was constantly pushing him back to do more General Ragtooth.
He kept pushing me back to read a bit more Ragtooth, which I thought was a bit worrying. It's a death trap! We can't possibly
We're getting
survive!
great odds. Zygon is giving us 2-1.
We? What do you mean, we?
I don't know if he realised at the time, but I'd pretty much cast him as General Ragtooth before he'd even walked through the door. A few weeks later, I rang him to say that he was in the film. He asked me which character he would be playing, and I informed him that it would be General Ragtooth. There was about a 3-second pause on the phone, and then he muttered back to me, "I thought you might."
Anyway, the session went quite well and we parted on good terms, and a couple of weeks later he rang up to say I'd been offered a part. So when I asked him which one, he said Ragtooth, and he got a muttered reply.
So with 1 week to go before principal photography, I still hadn't even cast all of the parts. What I was particularly lacking was the Mygon slaves, which are actually at the beginning of the film. But because I didn't have them yet, what I did was I pushed that scene to the very end of the principal photography production schedule so that I would have time to actually cast these characters while I was actually shooting the film. What was a particular issue was finding the character of Akunti. So Akunti is a bully within the slave colony, and Kiris sticks up for another slave and has a fight with him to protect this smaller, weaker slave. And it was particularly important that the actor playing that character would have a certain physical presence, because the larger the character, the more dangerous the character looks, then the more intrepidation Kiris is putting himself in to save this other, weaker slave. Create that sense that Icarus is a very selfless character and therefore make him very likeable. I needed somebody with that kind of physical presence. So it was really much to my delight when I first met Ricky Kimpton, because he is like 6'8" tall, and I haven't met him. I just thought to myself, fantastic. He is going to dwarf Icarus, and that is really going to set Icarus up as the good guy, and hopefully make the audience think to themselves, yeah, this guy's a good guy. I want to go on this journey with this guy. I'm going to root for this guy.
I got involved with Star Warrior through a great friend, Gordon Hinson, who played Jaeger. Me and him had just filmed in Durham for a student film. He told me that this film was coming out, and he said that he would speak to the director, Mark, and he did, and here we are. I'm happy he did. It was a great project.
What was also really good about meeting Ricky Kimpton was that he got me in touch with Jamie Michael Withers, who went on to play Ragnik.
The way I remember it, I got involved with Star Warrior through a friend of mine. He reached out and said that he was part of a project at the moment that sounded interesting, and he'd showed Mark, the director, a previous audition that I'd done for drama school at the time, and he liked the audition. So the way I remember it, Mark sent me the script. I read it over a few nights because I had to reread a few things because some of the names and things, like, it wasn't like a cut and dry narrative, but I thought it seemed ambitious, especially for an independent film, and I liked the sound of Mark. So I read the script, I liked the character, and I went to his house and auditioned and got the part.
It was now 3 days left to go before principal photography, and I was hopeful and really looking forward to a flying start in the actual production.
So on the first day, great start. Makeup for David took 3 hours, which, yeah, it's a little bit more than what we were hoping for.
To be fair, Gary pretty much got it all spot on. He estimated 1 hour per character for makeup. The only character he got that drastically wrong for was that of General Ragtooth, and also found out that some of his horns were falling off his face.
I did think that the first day of makeup was going to be the most difficult because I had to make all the prosthetics for their faces. But after the end of day one, we decided to strip it back a little bit and just basically go with a more simpler look. Just so that we could get them bish bosh bosh out of there, get on set.
The only downside of that was that it would have a knock-on effect on the other Sabin Rag characters, the other military characters, because the way that the Sabin biodiversity works is that as a character moves up the military command, they grow more horns on their face. So in order to basically make sure that David had the most horns, we had to remove horns from other characters. But this wasn't necessarily a bad thing because, again, that saved time in making up those characters as well. So pretty much after day one, we had no usable footage because every scene we'd shot had General Ragtooth in it, and we had to bin all of that footage because day two, he was going to have a completely different look. Not the best of starts, but without the time to do a full dress rehearsal, these are the things that happened during principal photography.
We managed to make up so many people in such a short space of time that I often wonder how we did it.
Well, the most interesting thing about making the film was actually doing green screen, because I knew all about green screen. I'd been trained for the possibility, but I'd never actually done any in all the years I've been acting. So that was really interesting, learning the techniques, adapting to that kind of work, and so it was good.
The green screen process was really fun. I did it only a short amount of time. There was a scene in the start of the film where me and Icarus got beamed up into this spaceship. It was kind of hard imagining being in the forest when we weren't actually there, But yeah, it was a really fun experience.
Acting on the green screen was challenging, as certainly to begin with, just getting used to having to imagine where you are and what's around you and what's happening. The funniest part was when we were doing one of the gladiator fights, and it was the electro rounds, which we were using these kind of children's bowling balls to create it, and when you were throwing them, sometimes they would just bounce right back in, and we were losing them. Yeah, and sometimes you were having to duck at one of them coming right back at you.
I was kind of directing the shot through the camera and trying to focus on the shots, whilst also at the same time trying not to get hit on the head with these things, and it was kind of, it must have been like directing Apocalypse Now. Yeah, the green screen studio was a fair size, but it was really a terrible challenge on some shots. So for example, the shot where David is in Jehovah's temple and he sees something 50 metres in the distance. Well, I would have loved to have done that as one big long shot and sort of have David out of focus and walk into focus. It would have been a beautiful artistic move. But because we only had 3 metres of depth on the green screen, instead what we had to do was kind of chop those moves up. So David kind of walks 3 metres from the back of the green screen just past the camera, and then we cut away, and then of course we cut to Ragtooth as he actually approaches the object that was in the distance. So cutting up like that gave us the chance to actually create fake space within the green screen arena. The big challenge though was we actually had the camera right against the wall to maximise the distance that we could get David to walk, which meant that as soon as he was 1 or 2 inches past the camera, he had to suddenly come to an abrupt stop as his nose was literally 1 inch off the wall. And of course he couldn't slow down as he approached the wall, because then it would become obvious what was actually happening, that there was some reason he was having to slow down. Especially at the beginning of the walk, because at the beginning of the walk he's having to accelerate off, and David did a great job because he literally just kept the pace going, and then when he got that 1 inch past the camera he came to an abrupt stop and somehow managed to, you know, not bash his nose off the wall. But it all cut together great, amazingly. You know, it really has created that sense of space within Jehovah's temple, so I'm very happy with the way that it's actually cut together despite the limitations of what we actually had.
My greatest challenge, that had to be the scene on the Sabin command ship where I fight Ragnik, played by Jamie Michael Withers. Now Jamie was 19 and obviously fit. I was nearer 68 than 67 and not fit at all, yet I had to knock him out. I remember when we met, my first comment was, "I'm old enough to be his granddad. Is anybody going to believe this?" Anyway, we tried for it, and I swung a punch and ended flat on my face. It took us something like 6 takes to get it right, and every time Jamie went down dutifully like he's supposed to. I don't know how he felt being knocked out by an old man, but he was very professional about it, so I suppose I ought to be grateful.
The other thing about the fight scenes was that the regalia kept coming off, so in between takes we had to keep sticking it back on.
Acting wise, I play a character called Badib in Star Warrior, and this particular scene was shot on location, and I was getting punched in the stomach by a guy called Ricky, who's a giant, but he's a really nice guy, a really nice giant. And when he did it, I don't know, no recollection of putting it in my pocket, I dropped what turned out to be a National Lottery ticket onto the ground.
Yeah, so the National Lottery ticket found its way into the film, totally photobombed it, and made a cameo appearance. Fortunately, the National Lottery ticket was essentially white, and with it lying on the ground, essentially facing the sun, it exposed and overexposed like most white things would. Which is just as well, because we couldn't very well have a British National Lottery ticket on the planet Thalinia 10,000 years in the future.
Did he hit you?
Yeah, so in the script it said that Akiris throws the rock off the Bolshan's head. However, every time Jake did that, the polystyrene rock kind of fluttered around in the wind, and it made it very obvious that it was made of polystyrene. So we changed it to Akiris sneaks out of the bushes and smashes the rock on the Bolshan's head. However, that had its problems also.
In the film, we got attacked by Bolshan soldiers, and in the film, I had a polystyrene rock, and I had to hit him on the head with it. When I was hitting him on the head with it, I was holding it in one hand instead of two. So the director, Mark, noticed that straight away, and I had to film loads and loads of shots until I got it right.
Hit him!
Die!
Brilliant! Out! Back in for the gun! Perfect!
So the difficulty for Jake was the fact that he was trying to come out of the bushes at a certain speed, and he was trying to obviously manoeuvre himself around the obstacle that is the bush. And the natural reaction in a situation like that is to want to have one hand free to help your balance. So he was letting go of the rock with one hand, and that meant that it made it pretty obvious that the rock was made of polystyrene, because it was a rather large rock and there's just no way a child could hold a rock like that with one hand. So we ended up doing it over and over and over again, which meant that poor Connor kept getting whacked on the head over and over and over again until we got it right.
I shared a scene with Jennifer Goody, who plays Stam, and this is in her place. And it turned out by sheer coincidence that the makeup on her face was exactly the same colour as the wall behind her. So I was worried that all you're going to see is this purple wall with two eyes sticking out.
Yeah, the seats matching the skin colour of Stam exactly was purely by chance. So I had no problem with that, to be honest, because this was supposed to be her club, her place. So it would be a good idea, interesting idea, that the club would be kind of kitted out to be a kind of extension of her. What I did have a problem with at the time, however, was that as soon as we started filming, a banging noise suddenly was heard, and I looked over the balcony and there were some engineers fixing the elevator. Now, I'd been up that elevator hundreds of times, never seen anybody fixing it ever. Just by sod's law, we go to do some filming, and suddenly, you know, the things broke and the engineers are there fixing it. So I stuck my head over the balcony, had a chat with them, and they said they had a big problem and that they would be there all day making noise. So we had no choice but to just continue filming and just hope for the best. What was a saving grace, however, was the fact that this was supposed to be her club, and with it being a nightclub, it was totally justifiable that we would have some dance music over the top of their dialogue, and also the sound of the people inside the club. Having added those two sound elements to the soundtrack, you can't actually hear the banging noise, thank God. So it's all worked out well in the end. But yeah, interesting location, that's for sure.
Another interesting story was when we were shooting green screen. I was there because there was a fight for the fight choreography, and it was Jamie who was playing Ragnek, where he was fighting David, who played Ragtooth, and Jamie was standing forwards and Ragtooth grabs him from behind, and Jamie's supposed to throw a backwards headbutt, and as he does this, the green screen was traipsed across the floor and they both slipped, and Ragtooth David, his head clattered on the floor, and at that moment I remember his head hitting the floor so loud, and we all looked at each other thinking that he was going to be unconscious, but we were all, it was all a sign of relief when we heard him go, "Oh, crikey," or what. I remember him saying something along them lines, and he walloped his head so hard, but to give him credit, he got back up, he plodded on with it, a couple of paracetamol later, he was fine. But that was a very touch and go moment. That we thought that the day was over after that point. Yeah,
the Bolshan outfit, when I designed it, I didn't take into account the fact that humans have to breathe. which is interesting because I actually did my first degree in applied biology.
10 minutes in that costume, I feel like you're going to pass out, and I actually thought I was going to pass out. I get killed in it about 5 times, but I think I got it all right, and I think it looked good on camera in the end. Well, I hope so.
The other challenge with the Bolchin outfit was the fact that once it was on, people struggled to see. The reason being is because there was no ventilation, the steam that comes off a person's breath would then collect inside the helmet, and it would fog up the glasses that were underneath. So we developed a system whereby whoever was wearing the Bolchin outfit, they would have what was called a Bolchin buddy, and that person would be kind of like a guide dog, and sort of guide them around the place to ensure that they wouldn't fall over or crash into something. The Bolchins completely dominate the galaxy, but unfortunately they're just not very good at designing costumes.
I remember a scene where I had to run into a lift and jump into it, and I think on the second or third take we did, I landed on my side and hurt, like, I don't know, like maybe a rib or something. So, I mean, I was more concerned that Mark was gonna worry that, you know, it was gonna be an issue in terms of me getting injured on set, but I don't know, just wipe it off and continue, I guess.
Shooting on location was, well, it was nice to get out and about because we had been on the green screen quite a lot, but it brought all its other challenges, like horrendous weather some days, and obviously you picking up other noises and all that other stuff and other people.
We had a shoot in a quarry which had a fence round it saying no admission.
I can remember one day there was somewhere where we went and we had to climb over a fence to get to where we really needed to do the shot, but Phil really didn't want to, but we had a vote and he was outvoted, and I don't think he was very happy about it, and I tried to persuade him that it was a great location, but yeah, he wasn't convinced.
Yeah, all I remember is I was trying to compose the shot where the first of the Scrapunians walked right into the camera, and all I could hear in the background was Phil complaining.
However, we went in, did the shoot, and as we were wrapping up, a security van pulled up. A man got out and asked who we were, what we were doing. We were all rather worried about this, but Mark assured him that we had permission to be there, talked about having spoken to his head office, and he seemed perfectly happy to let us go.
Yeah, he wasn't actually a security guy, he was like a technician. He'd come to do some kind of surveying or something like that. And to be honest, he wasn't bothered about us being there at all. The only interest he had was the fact that it's not every day that you're in the middle of kind of nowhere doing a surveying job and there's 3 aliens there. So his interest was actually really just based on, God, what the hell are you guys doing here? You know, I wasn't expecting to see 3 aliens here. And he was actually a really nice guy, and he even offered to give us a lift in his van. We were going to get in his van, but then when he opened up the back of his van, it was a pretty small confined space. So we, in the end, just said thanks for the offer, but you know, we think we'll just walk back with the equipment.
Another location shot was in the centre of Newcastle, and I had to squeeze through a concrete grill into the civic centre. Mark had assured us that we had permission, but following the quarry incident, I wasn't too sure about that, and was rather worried that the police would arrive, everyone would scarper, leaving me stuck somewhere in a concrete grill, trying to bluff my way out of it, wearing costume and a blue face.
Yeah, we did actually have permission to shoot on that location. In fact, I even had an email from the press office at Newcastle Council to say that we had permission, so if the police had turned up, it would not have been a problem at all. However, I can understand Harry's concern because he only just fit through that grill, and you know, when I say only just fit, he really only just fit through. And I'm so glad that he did fit through, because it just looks great in the film. In fact, out of all the shots that have Harry in them, I think that's the best looking shot out of all of them. I think it just looks absolutely great.
My shirt. This shirt here, the very one. This was the shirt I wore on day one of the filming. I turned up to the studio wearing it and was directed upstairs to get my costume. So up I went, and here we ran into the first problem. This is a low-budget film, so it doesn't have a vast costume budget, and they had one for me. But it was a costume that had been designed for a man who was 40 years younger than me and half my weight. I physically could not get it on. I was struggling, and it was meeting about here at the front, so eventually we just gave up. It was a sweatshirt, I suppose, but I just couldn't physically get it on. So I ended up in this shirt, and they found me what I would describe as a flak jacket. It was a black canvas thing, like a body warmer, which my arms went through, and it was covered in big pockets and had a belt round the middle. That fitted, and it gave it I suppose, a sort of vague pseudo-military look. So that's what I ended up wearing. So this is the basis of my costume. It is my own personal shirt. It was an old shirt then, it's an even older shirt now, but it's made its way into the film and is now preserved for posterity.
With the speed of the producing of the film, essentially producing it within 3 months, and all the things we had to do in that 3 months, build the green screen studio, the casting, rehearsing the actors, building the props, developing the costumes, there just wasn't time to do a costume rehearsal. So yeah, that was rather unfortunate. But I thought David's shirt worked pretty good in the film. And it's kind of nice in a way that he brings a part of himself, into the character. But David wasn't the only one. Aaron Scott, who plays the bounty hunter Renegel, we couldn't get him into his costume either. Slightly different reason. He's kind of a bodybuilder. And I noticed he was quite well built during audition, but I didn't realise quite how well built he was. We ended up cutting the arms off his costume and doing all sorts of other alterations. And I think in the end there was like 3 of us squeezing him into the costume, and he only just fit. And I'm so glad he did, because I just love the way that Renegel looks. And had he have not fit into that costume, we would have ended up, rushing round trying to make a costume out of pretty much nothing. And I just don't think we would have come up with a look as good as how he ended up in the actual film.
Jamie and David again, and Jamie also pulls out a gun, I believe, and Ragtooth just calmly backhands this gun like it's nothing. Sorry, he just calmly backhands the gun. As he backhands the gun, it flies out of Jamie's hand, and then you hear it just clicking across the floor, and at that moment all you hear is me in the background go and then all of us just burst into laughter. Even thinking about it now, it's just his calmness of hitting it, where he pulls out the gun, he goes, ha, and he just goes, and the gun just bounces across the floor. So for me it was hilarious, and everyone just couldn't stop laughing. It was a great moment.
That was so funny. That was so funny though. That was so fucking funny. And then she went, woo!
We went out to near Newcastle Keep on some steps just down from there.
We were dressed in full costume, blue faces. One of the cast had something that resembled a bull's head on.
And there were some kids that were smoking, not cigarettes. They were getting very happily stoned. And then we just sort of started walking down the steps. And their faces was really, really funny. They were obviously thinking, what is this stuff we're smoking?
They saw us coming, and I'm not sure what went through their heads, whether it was just somebody coming, or whether they thought that perhaps they were smoking something stronger than what had originally been intended. But anyway, they moved on, and we carried on with the shooting.
I'd never made a film before, so it came as a bit of a surprise to learn that you don't shoot the scenes in the order they appear in the script. You shoot them in the order which is most convenient for the director. So you can't find yourself sitting around for an hour doing nothing in the green room and then frantically shooting 3 totally unrelated scenes right next to each other. And you have to supply the appropriate response and emotion to those scenes at that time, even though they are not related. Then it was the middle of summer, and we were working on a green screen, indoors, in temperatures which must have been in the high 90s. So we were wringing with sweat every day while the sun was shining outside. And on top of that, when we did actually get out and do some location work, the weather was appalling.
Well, one interesting thing was when we went on location work. We set off in August, nice weather, thin costume.
Not much of a costume, if you like a cloth, and he was just absolutely freezing.
But when we were there, waiting for my take, we got lashed with hailstones. And I still had to sit there because there was nothing else to do, and I started to bring on hypothermia.
Yay! Not yay. So I took him back down to the van while Mark was up on the hillside in a hailstorm trying to rewrite the scene. Rather him than me.
Well, when you are blue, there are going to be challenges. And it was Harry French, who played Ball, who discovered this basically, because not only were our faces blued up, but our hands were as well. And when you're acting, you're expressive. You know, you hold hands, you shake hands, you move hands around, and the blue paint comes off and the pink skin shows through. So Harry it was who identified a new medical condition from which we all suffered. It was called pink finger. And after every take, somebody would announce, "Ah, I've got pink finger!" So the poor old director had to spend the gaps between every take repainting our hands blue. I don't know if any other film directors had to do that, but he did.
It's pretty difficult to direct a film on green screen anyway, because obviously when you're shooting green screen, you are constantly having to move the actors round an axis and try to visualize as you're shooting what's actually going to be there. But to then have to be bipolar and break off in between takes to paint hands and necks, when what you really need to do is be then looking at the script and checking that the continuity is working, is a very, very difficult thing to do. But what was worse was the fact that in between takes I was having to get on my hands and knees and brush all the unwanted residue off the green screen. I didn't mind painting hands so much, there was kind of an artistry to that, but getting on my hands and knees and brushing the residue off the green screen, well, that was, you know, really demeaning. I can't imagine Steven Spielberg or Ridley Scott having to do that in between takes, but it was just something that had to be done, and I couldn't get the actors to do that because of course they had blue hands, so they would end up just putting more residue on the green screen. So it was a real challenge to do those two things and then go back to the script, shoot a scene, do those two things, go back to the script, shoot a scene, and just kind of constantly switch between those three things. To keep my head in the film whilst doing those was very, very difficult. So we're nearly there. 2 days left to shoot. So I go to pick Phil up from the metro station as I had every day, and I then decide to check the weather. And it turns out that tomorrow, the next day, which is the last day of principal photography, there's a 95% chance of rain. In fact, for the entire rest of the week, there's a 95% chance of rain. So Phil gets in the car and I then inform him of this, and I said, look, it's going to rain basically tomorrow and for the rest of the week, so we're going to have to push the last day's production to the week after. To which Phil responds to me, well, you better get it done today because I'm going to get my hair cut on Saturday. I responded by saying, what do you mean you're going to get your hair cut on Saturday? He says, well, it's my cousin's wedding the week after, and we've arranged to get tram lines shaved down the side of our heads, which is going to make us look radically different, so you better get it all shot today. I was absolutely flabbergasted. I couldn't believe that my lead actor had accepted a role in a feature film, known full well all the way through production that he was going to radically change the way he looked 3 days after principal photography, and didn't think that was worth mentioning to me or any of the rest of the cast or crew. So I tried to explain to Phil that this was putting me in an impossible situation, and that out of respect for the fact that he hadn't told me this before I hired him, that perhaps he could kick his hairdressing appointment back a few days, or back end of the next week. To which he responded, no, it's been booked for 3 weeks now, we're all going to go and get our haircut together, it's going to be a right laugh. Well, obviously I would never have hired Phil in the lead role had I have known that he was going to do this, because you would have to be crazy as a director or a producer to hire an actor who was going to radically change the way they look 3 days after principal photography, because as we all know, productions pretty much always get behind schedule. I mean, $200 million films get behind schedule, and they've got 5,000-10,000 people working on them. So I was absolutely flabbergasted at this point, and no matter what I said to Phil, he was just adamant, no, he's going to get his haircut, and that's it, and to help with the film. So basically I was left with the situation where I was going to have to shoot 2 days worth of footage in 1 day. That was a challenge. That was always going to be a challenge, but as it turned out, it became an even bigger challenge because of the things that actually happened on that day.
Phil, I'm curious. He had a fight scene to do, which involves some physicality, and he...
Yeah, well, if I was to name this story, it would be The Man in the Invisible Pain. Because in my opinion, I think Phil, who played Akiris, didn't want to do the fight scene.
Well, Phil didn't want to do the fight scene. He actually came up to me and specifically asked if he really had to do the fight scene. So I then explained to him why the fight scene was so important. The fact that, Akiris is the type of guy that sticks up for other people. He's selfless, he's the good guy, and how that was fundamentally important to the film because that would get people to like the character and therefore root for him and want to go on this crazy journey with him. And Phil was just not happy about doing the fight scene. I have no idea why. I mean, we rehearsed it in my back garden. He totally signed on to do it, but on that particular day he decided he did not want to do the fight scene anymore.
Phil throws his first punch in mid-air, doesn't hit me, doesn't hit nothing, but grabs his shoulder and starts writhing in pain.
You're in the shot, Phil. Right. No, just my fucking arms are aching, I don't know why. I'm not even hurt or anything. You have a stretch break and you're swimming.
That's probably what it is, aye.
No, I never heard before, long before that. They were good painkillers.
I was literally looking at him. I didn't do it. I didn't look. I didn't do anything. And he's like, I know you didn't. I thought you didn't hit him either. So he was writhing in pain on his arm. And then I went and spoke with Mark, came back, and he was lying on the mattress. He was getting his arm massaged, and I'm literally looking, going, this is a bit strange. But I thought, hey ho. Spoke with Mark. He said, let's go on to a different scene, give him a chance to rest.
So now we've shot all the other shots that we needed for that day and the other day, the next day, but we've shot them all in that 1 day by stripping down the storyboard shots. And I'm looking at the sun and I'm thinking, wow, I've got 20 minutes of light left. We've already shot one version of the last of the other shots that we could shoot before resuming the fight scene. But as always, you always want that second take just in case of a file corruption or something like that. So I said to the guys, that was great. We've got 20 minutes of light left. We're going to do one more take just out of security. And then we're going to resume with the fight scene. And we're going to get the fight scene finished, which means we've actually, through it all, we've finished the film. Which is amazing because that means what we've done is we've done 2 days shoot in 1 day. And all of that, despite the fact that Phil got injured, which wasted a good 20 minutes, half an hour, and also resulted in us having to rejig the entire schedule. But through it all, we have managed to finish this film, you know, so I'm feeling really high at this point. I'm feeling elated and proud of me and proud of everybody else for what we've achieved. So basically the guys start walking back to the starting point to do this one last take of this other shot before we resume the fight scene. And as they're walking back to the starting point, Phil suffers another injury.
Alan Will. Okay, go for it. Hold on. Don't think I'll have time to do 3 though.
Are you alright?
Nah. What's up?
Oh, fucker, my ankle just popped.
Oh shit, did you go over on it?
No, I think my tendon just went a bit. Oh, shit. Hold on.
Can we get the mattress over here?
And I'm just kind of looking up at the sun and watching it slowly move across the sky towards the ground and just think to myself, I can't believe this. We are so close, and now the entire thing is completely out of my hands, because unless Phil rises to his feet, we can't finish the fight scene. It was just a thought process that I can't really even explain. I was flabbergasted, perplexed, bemused. I just kind of was almost not taking it in. After everything we've been through that day, to then have Phil have another injury, and ultimately that scuppering the end of the film, I just didn't know what to say. I really didn't.
So now he's writhing up here with his leg. So it's not his leg, it's his arm. So then I went and spoke with Margaret. I don't think he wants to do this. I went, why? Look. And he was literally getting his leg massaged, his arm massaged, lying on a mattress like a starfish. And I just thought, oh, this is just too much. This is just too much to take.
So after speaking to Ricky, I decided to go over and talk to Phil and assess how bad his latest injury was. After speaking to Phil, he was absolutely adamant that he was not going to be able to finish the fight scene. So I said to him, look, here's the situation. Obviously you're getting your hair radically changed on Saturday. We're probably going to have to wait a month and a half until your hair grows back. And then hopefully we can get all the necessary cast together and get the fight scene finished. Phil thought that was the best thing to do. Then Phil asked me if, because in his mind he had essentially finished the film, if he would still get paid his £300 completion money that I'd offered him at the beginning of the film, because in his mind he had still essentially finished the film. I then informed Phil that no, he wouldn't get the completion money at that point, because the fight scene was part of the film, and if he hasn't finished the fight scene, then he hasn't finished the film. So the option he has is basically wait a month and a half until his hair grows back, we come back, we finish the fight scene, then I'll pay him, or he can somehow manage to get to his feet, finish off the fight scene, and then I will literally pay him tomorrow. Well, fortunately, that was the golden carrot that managed to get Phil to his feet, and we managed to get on with the fight scene and get the film finished. But I have to say, I mean, you know, by the time we finished it, it was nearly nighttime basically. It was so dark, and in order to see anything I had to have the gain on the camera whacked right up. Obviously the problem with that is it creates an incredible amount of dancing grain and distortion on your picture. So it was always going to be a problem to try and colour match the fight scene footage that we'd shot earlier on with the fight scene footage later on, because the sun would be in a different position. But because it was so dark, the quality of the footage that we shot, you know, when we resumed the fight scene was really quite terrible, and I had to spend many a day really remastering the footage to make it halfway decent. But we got the film finished, and we walked out of the canyon, the quarry, basically using our mobile phones to guide the way. It wasn't the safest thing in the world, but once darkness starts to fall, it really accelerates, and you know, we got the film finished and we managed to get back to the van safely, and we had the film in the can. And it was at that point in time, through all the trials and tribulations and difficulties at that point in time, it was just a great feeling to actually somehow, against all odds, get this film finished.
I first got involved with Star Warrior as an actor because that's what Mark asked me to do, but it was just a small role. What he really wanted me to be on board about was more or less being an editing consultant. That meant I got to see his first real cut of the film, which wasn't complete in the sense that there would be narration where there was meant to be scenes, so not a narration that would be in the end film. And sometimes it was just very basic special effects, but not what the finished product would be anywhere near, not as sophisticated at all. But it had a narrative in it, it had scenes in it, great acting, great concepts, so it became quite apparent. I could follow the story no problem. It became quite apparent where this was actually going, which was very exciting, and I was really anticipating seeing how it would end up, especially with the special effects. The backstory that was unfolding in the narration on the first cut of Star Warrior.
In order to ensure that they would be remembered, they made genetic variations of themselves.
Was trying to condense 10,000 years of events and people, because Star Wars is set to 10,000 years in the future, and because of that very thing, it was far too involved and far too detailed, and both me and Mark agreed pretty quickly that this needs to be cut down, condensed and made much more snappy.
I could snap your neck and take your shit.
One of the things about the first cut as well was the first 3 scenes, which featured the young Akiras, were totally missing. They hadn't even been filmed yet. At that point, what you have is narration explaining what those scenes are, but that comes right after the narration and the scroll, which will be there in the finished print. Seemed extremely long, so that was a bit difficult, but you could visualize it again. It was there, it just had to use your imagination. Also in the first cut of Star Warrior, there was a lot of temporary backdrops. These are scenes where actors were in an environment which Mark hadn't decided or settled on what those backdrops would actually be. And in order to be a variant on the previous scene, otherwise it would be a lot of green screen tagged together with the same backdrop, he used various different ones. And again, it evoked something, it made it atmospheric, and it was a taste of things to come. Another thing about the first cut of Star Warrior was there was a lot of temporary effect shots which were in place to obviously propel the story forward, but were nowhere near what they should be. And they were quite humorous, to be honest, in a way like Terry Gilliam's animation for Monty Python would be, but they certainly served the purpose.
So with the rough cut completed, it was very encouraging, because what I realised from the rough cut was that we actually had a film that made narrative or story sense, and there were no big holes in the film or anything like that. But of course we used some very cheap 2D animation spaceship effects just to kind of help fill in the gaps. So the next step was to start working on some proper 3D animation shots. So I started building spaceships and textures and various other things to populate the space element of the actual film. I then began to start animating these shots, but about 3 or 4 shots in, I realised it was such a body of work that I was going to have to bring an animator on board to help. So I put the project out there and eventually found an animator called Miles Eve. He was willing to do all of the 107 effect shots that were needed for the film for £4,500. And the deal was you'd do 107 effect shots, but I was only allowed 1 amendment per shot. This was a bit of a challenge because the work was very complex, However, the deal that we did was not only would he do a render for me of each shot, but that he would also provide me with the project file. And what this meant was that if there was a shot that I didn't think was exactly the way that I wanted it to be, that I could then go into the project file and adapt it to the way that I wanted it to be. So that meant that I could spend the 107 amendments that I had for the entire bulk of work on preliminary on shots that really required those amendments. So some of the more complicated shots I might have spent 6 or 7 amendments on, but there were many shots where even though it wasn't perfect, I would not even spend 1 amendment on, so I could save those amendments up for the more complicated shots. And this system worked very well. It meant that the complicated shots, we managed to get them to a point that I was satisfied, and the easier shots, having accepted them not exactly the way that I wanted them to be, I was able to go into the project and do all the necessary changes. You know, between the two of us, we were Industrial Light and Magic. We were Weta Digital. And when you bear in mind the film has as many spaceship effects as any Star Wars or any Star Trek film, that really is a great achievement for 2 people that are working together. So Miles is a nice guy, very easy to work with, but there were some teething problems at first. The difficulty was we had so many shots to do together and the work was so complex that the first 6 months was probably really just spent putting together a methodology to try and get through the work. After 6 months we'd only done 3 or 4 shots together, and at that pace it would have taken us the next 10 years to get all of the shots done. But once we got that methodology in place and we got all the assets together, you know, all the models and all the texture maps and diffuse maps, we really started to fly with the work and managed in the end to get it all done in probably the space of about a year and a half. Which, considering the amount of work we had to do, I think that was one hell of an achievement for 2 people.
The second cut that Mark showed me was quite an advancement on the first one, in the sense that all the backdrops for all the scenes with the actors in were pretty much fleshed out and were pretty close to what they were actually going to look like in the end. And in the same vein as that, there was shots, the special effects shots, spaceships out in space, stuff like that, was in 3D, had much more animation or better animation, and looked more visually accurate, although there was some issues with brightness and just general look of some of it. But it was a huge leap into where you could tell this film was going to end up looking really good. Really enjoyed it.
So once the 107 amendments had been used up, Miles departed the project as we agreed, and it was now time for me to go into each individual animation shot and do some tweaks and enhancements. So just things like changing some of the diffuse maps, changing the specularity, changing the lighting, sometimes doing some re-animation, adding some extra things in, like some extra spaceships or some extra planets, things like that. Having done that, then what I did was I started the process of rendering out each individual element separately, so I could then put them on a timeline and build them up as a composite. So the reason that I did that was because by separating out each individual element, you then have control over each individual element. It allows you to alter the brightness or the exposure of each individual spaceship, and this really helps in terms of really helping to draw attention to different parts of the composition at different times. And in particular, what it really does is help you to create a certain artistic look within the composition that you can constantly tweak and enhance in terms of making that shot look great, but also in terms of matching it up to the previous shot. So for example, one section that I did a lot of work on was the asteroid field chase. When that was first rendered out, the asteroids were way too bright, but the slave ship was not too bright because its diffuse map or skin was rather dark to begin with. So by being able to render these out separately, I was then able to increase the brightness of the ship so that we could really spot it, but to also darken the asteroids so that they looked a lot more realistic. What it also allowed me to do was actually do other layers of asteroid fields and kind of thicken up the asteroid field to make it seem more dense. And one of the other main things that I did was I made my own boosters for the back of the ship. I produced a brighter, more energetic booster trail at the back of the ship, and also what I did was I changed the colours of the boosters. So essentially the good guys have blue boosters, evil guys or the bad guys, their ships would have red boosters, which was great in terms of, in a particularly complex scene, being able to spot which ship is which was particularly important in that scene because there was so much going on. There was asteroids flying everywhere, and it would be very easy to, not know which ship is which within the craziness of the asteroids flying past and blocking your view of the ship, but also the asteroids putting shadows on the ships. So it not only improved the look, but it also improved the way the audience would comprehend the scene, the clarity of what is actually happening within each effect shot. Rendering was also a big problem for the 3D animation shots of the spaceships. Some of these scenes were very, very dense and had an extremely large amount of geometry. One particular shot that was really a problem was the shot where the slave ship flies into Jerova's temple and has to negotiate its way through the spinning rings. Well, that environment had an incredible amount of geometry going on. The project file was about 4.5 gigabytes. So I ended up setting that off on my computer, and it actually took about 1.5 months to render out that one shot. Which was a nightmare because the computer was just crunching away so hard I couldn't really do anything else with the computer. So it wasn't just a case of the time that it took to render some of these shots out, but there was a certain logic to when you rendered them out, because you had to get yourself to a point where you didn't particularly need that particular computer for 1.5 months, and then choose that moment to then start rendering out such a complex shot. Obviously, under normal circumstances, studio circumstances, they would hire a render farm, and that would just crunch away while the animators continue to work on actually animating the shots or editing the actual film. But in this case, I couldn't afford a render farm, so I just had to try and render at certain opportune moments. So having completed the composition and adjustments to all of the effect shots, I was able to then add them to the actual film on the master timeline. This allowed me to produce a third cut.
The third cut that Mark gave me of Star Warrior was really good. Everything that was an issue before had more or less been addressed, including stuff like colour grading with actors and green screen backgrounds. That was really spot on. All the effects, that brightness thing which I picked up on had been taken out. The very smooth animation, the sound mix was there, music, anything like that. So it was very, very close to getting what you would describe as a final cut. Great narrative, the film, to the point where I almost forgot I was watching something that wasn't actually 100% complete, which is exactly what you want. It flowed, technical wise, spot on, performance wise, all of that stuff, all the elements were there nearly at the finishing post.
I felt there was a few opportunities missing in terms of flushing out the world of Star Warrior. So one example of that would be the planet Scrapinia In the third cut, in fact all the cuts before that, the slave ship would just fly towards the planet Scrapinia, and next thing you know it lands on the planet Scrapinia. I felt that it would be worth spending a little bit of time flushing out the world of Scrapinia a little bit. So I built a very large ruined environment that sort of stretched off into the distance, a world that looks like a city that's been hit by nuclear bombs. I put that together so I could then show the slave ship flying along the ruins of the city, just to give it more scope. And I also added some extra space shots just to show the slave ship actually approaching the planet, and to see the violent storms that actually go on the planet from slightly outside in space. Shots like that were not absolutely necessary to tell the story, to serve the narrative, but it's just another example of a thing that makes the film seem that bit bigger and just kind of delivers more in terms of world building and also value in terms of creating science fiction. Once all the extra special effects shots had been done, I was therefore able to put together the fourth cut of the film. I decided at this point that it was worth showing it to some friends just to get some feedback. I felt that the film was finished. This being the kind of film that it is, a special effects based film, I could have literally kept working on this film for the rest of my life. But at some point you have to recognise that you have followed the creative process to the point that all significant changes have been done, and that carrying on for another 2 years fiddling with this or that would not be worthwhile, because all these things would probably not be noticed by the average audience, and they would have no effect on the story at all. The story was there, it was laid down. So after 4.5 years of fun and frustration, I decided it was time to cease the creative process and accept that I'd taken the film to the point that practically it was not really worthwhile continuing on and making further adjustments.
The thing I like most about the experience, looking back now, is that it made me think of my childhood. When I was a little boy, children like me wanted to be firemen or spacemen or engine drivers, but I didn't. I wanted to be a film star. My favourite thing in the world was to go to the Regal Cinema around the corner, which I do about half a dozen times a year with my parents. Well, I never thought I'd actually achieve it, but now I've actually made a feature film. It's the nearest I'll ever get to being a film star, and it's not very near, but it's one off the bucket list. At least I've done that, and most people don't do that. So I'm happy with that.
Would I like to play Janeshwar again? Yes. There's plenty of scope to do it because he clones himself. He could be 1 million people. I could be an army of me. It would be awesome. Imagine my face on your screen thousands of times. No!
So I think the only thing I would like to add to this project would be Mark, the director himself. He's put countless hours into actually making this film work. Where any person would have given up, he kept on pushing through. And I don't think he gets as much notoriety as he should. But he's a great fella, and I'm happy I met him because I've got a new friend out of this. Mark, if you're watching this, thank you for all of your hard work, your determination, and if anything, you've taught me the power of being positive.
At the time of principal photography, I felt like I was being a little bit unlucky with various things, weather and various other things that happened. However, looking back now, I look at a lot of the things that could have easily not worked, that in the end have worked, and the fact that I was lucky to find such a great bunch of actors to come and take part in this film. You know, the cast was 32 members strong. That's a lot of actors to find in your local area to come in and put their passion into a project. And considering, I'm sure many people would have probably looked at this project and thought, I'm not going to get involved in that. There's no way this guy is going to be able to pull this off. It's way too ambitious. I actually feel quite lucky that I had such a great cast of people who really rallied around me and just gave me their all and were willing to come along on this crazy journey and believe, you know, in the world of Star Warrior and this absolutely mad vision that I had for the film. So, you know, like, just the last thing really, just to say thank you to everybody that got involved, and, you know, let's just see what happens.